So I am, like many around this country, starting to go insane because I keep hearing after this past election of Zohran Mamdani to become the next mayor of New York that it was, the social media platform, and that he was just so, eloquent and like the next Obama. And yeah, as a millennial who Barack Obama was the second time I was able to vote for president. I was actually living in Chicago and working in Chicago on the night he was elected the first time in 2008. And I stood outside of Grant Park. I couldn't get into the main section, but I was in the outside section with a friend of mine from Paris, from France. And I was explaining the electoral college system to a French woman. And it was one of the most beautiful moments of my life as I talked about American democracy and how we got to this wonderful place where a black man could finally be elected president. And having gone from that time, which at this point feels like a fever dream of a fictional place that I read about in some type of Disney as a book, to now, I am going to lose my goddamn senses if I keep having to listen to neolibs talk about, oh, Zohran Mamdani's win was all due to the social media campaign. I think we millennials are in a pretty advantageous position to explain that it's what he was promising. Hard stop. It's not only, let me take that back. It's what he was promising, comma, and the willingness to actually do something about it. Because I was there when Barack Obama said he was going to stop everything and get us, single payer healthcare. And I watched as this country looked at him one time when he questioned one white cop outside of Cambridge, for arresting Skip Gates outside of his house, a professor at Harvard who was wrongly arrested by this officer. And we took a week from the debate around whether or not we would give people health care to question whether it was all right if the president of the United States called out one cop who admittedly did a bad arrest.
Well, tonight, a few guys are in Washington, D.C. having a cold one. They just happen to be a Harvard professor, a police officer from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the President of the United States.
In the Rose Garden today, the three men who ignited a national firestorm over racial profiling sat down for a beer. Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates and Police Sergeant James Crowley, who arrested Gates in his own home, were invited by the president to talk about lowering the temperature on race. The president said he hoped to turn this controversy into a teachable moment for the nation.
And long story short, it's not why we don't have socialized healthcare, but it certainly didn't help taking time to have that conversation. We have seen so many things be promised to us over our lifetime. And I'm one of the older millennials, although black don't crack, so I know I don't look like it. I remember Dukakis. Like, my first cognizant political memory is for some reason being very excited about Dukakis. My mother talks about this constantly. I have seen so many people make a promise to set up a committee to look into the feasibility of whether or not the sector can handle the weight of potentially offering a thing. And then we had a man from our age group, a little bit younger than me, not gonna lie, but who understands that you're growing up and you're told you have to go to college. You have to go to college to get a good job. And then you go to college and you settle with all this debt that people before you never had to have. And then you still can't have a good job. And then you still can't afford to own a home. And then the concept, even whether or not you want to have a children, the concept of bringing a human life into this world is so cruel because you can't afford to take care of yourself barely, that we put those aside as well. We've put so many things aside. And I kind of have been going crazy because there's this moment that happened to me about a little over 2 years ago now. And I was working a line for the 5 months that we were on strike, 5 solid months as a WGA writer captain. And during that time, we had so many people bring us snacks and water and food, a lot of celebrities. It was really exciting. I got to meet Gabrielle Union one time. Oh my God, it was amazing. But so many wonderful people brought little treats and snacks on a singular occasion, and it was great. And we were so grateful. But there was one group of people who showed up on a semi-regular basis. And I remember towards the end of the 5 months, they seemed to be showing up more. And they were not only bringing really, really good food, they were bringing home state tacos. And I say that if you don't know, if that didn't make your mouth water, you have not lived in LA, because home state tacos, my friends, are one of the best brunch things you can have. One of the best breakfast things. I will eat a home state breakfast taco at any point of the day and I will be satisfied. Oh, shout out to home state. It's not the cheapest thing you could get because they would bring a whole case of them. And I think each taco is roughly around $3.50 for just like a basic egg taco. And then the more expensive ones were with bacon or brisket. They have tacos with brisket, which ain't cheap. And I think we all know that. They would bring a whole case of them for us. And then they would march. And that group was the Democratic Socialists of America. And I have spent the past 2 years thinking about the fact that these people who didn't know us brought us tacos. Now, I was a captain at a studio called Radford, but it's LA, so there's tons of studios. There was a lot at Netflix, which got a lot of attention because Imagine Dragons started doing concerts and everybody started doing concerts. It was great. There was a lot at Warner Brothers. There was one at Paramount. Basically, if it was a major movie studio, it had a lot in town. Sony, Amazon. And they would bring food, good food, to each of those things. And they came and they came and they came. And they never, I feel like particularly towards the end, they did not stop coming, like on a fairly regular basis. Like I said, at least like once a week. And I remember they would stay, not only just drop out food, they would march with us. And it was great. And I remember having an awareness of like what the Democratic Socialist of America was, but like, you know, I'm a big fan of France, so I know that socialism is a thing outside of here, but I was still kind of sort of in a mindset that like I wished socialism would happen in America, but like, you know, it's always going to be Democrats and Republicans. The strike ends and I do not stop thinking about these tacos, that at a time where it would have been irresponsible for me to spend money on a restaurant, because I had not been working for 5 months. And honestly, I wasn't working for, I think, the 5 months prior to the strike even happening. It stayed with me. It stayed with me. And we never talked about a candidate that was coming up for election. We never talked about like, you know, they told us they were the DSA, but they never pressed us to like join the DSA. They were just there and they were supporting us. It wasn't until a year later where I decided I'm going to actually not just think about these tacos I had a year ago. I'm going to like look into the DSA, see what they're about. And I found there was a local branch in my neighborhood in LA. I signed up for newsletters, and I occasionally get newsletters from the Democratic Socialist. And then this year, Zohran comes out of nowhere. And like a lot of people around this country, the first time I took notice of him, because I don't live in LA, I'm like one of the many of us millennials who are desperately wishing I did right now. But I used to. I lived in LA for 6 years and went and got my master's degree from the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. And I don't know why I made that sound, because it's not an Ivy League school. That's the sound of somebody who went to an Ivy League school. It is everybody's perpetual B school. I went to the Tisch School of the Arts, and when I was there, I had less than no money. I got in off of a wait list, which meant that I had actually not thought I was going. I had to rush there within 5 weeks before classes starting. And on occasion, I would get food from the halal cart at night. And because my budget was so tight, I knew that my treats in the morning were a bacon, egg, and cheese with a coffee from the cart, which was about, I think back in the day, back in 2010, I think that was $6. Like, or it was around there. And then another $6 at night. Actually, I think it might have been $5 because I would get lamb and rice extra white sauce at a Rafi's cart across the street from NYU. And I remember back then that it was $5 it was $4 because I would just have a 5 on me and I would give the dollar as a tip. That was what I did. And so when this video of him, Zohran, going to halal carts and talking about the cost now, 15 years, oh my God, it's so terrifying to even say that, 15 years later, for that same lamb over rice dish would be $8, was jarring to me, because I was sleeping on a cot in Flatbush in a 1-bedroom apartment I was sharing with one of my very good friends and another friend. And I did not really have a place to stay, and they were kind enough to let me stay there for 2 years of grad school. And that is how people have to make it in New York. That was 15 years ago. So now I'm just thinking, if I were going to grad school today and trying to make it in the current New York, I genuinely have no idea how I would feed myself. And this group of people showed up constantly at a time where I was striking for better labor practices and better earnings, and they had no reason to. You know who didn't show up for us? Karen Bass, the Democratic mayor of Los Angeles. She didn't show up for the first, I think it was 3.5 months of the strike. It was constantly while we were on strike, we would get, she would put out a statement that says, oh, I hope both sides come together and find an amiable way. Gavin Newsom did the same thing. Oh, I hope both sides would come together. You know what else Gavin Newsom did? There was a bill in the California State Senate to give unemployment payments to workers who were on strike. And it passed the California Senate and House, and it got to Gavin Newsom's desk. And on a Friday night, and this is a thing I notice you do, Gavin, my fellow Santa Clara Bronco, it disgusts me to say that. On a Friday night, when he thinks nobody's paying attention, Gavin Newsom goes and he vetoes the bill. That bill would have allowed me to get unemployment benefits while I was on strike. It would have allowed the difficult time that I was already going through to be significantly less difficult. It would have been an actual material good for a need that I had. And the political party that I had voted for all of my life, this is actually a very big week for me. Dick Cheney died, and the first time I ever went to a protest was in Stockton, California, to protest the Iraq War, I think was that 2002? Yeah. So big week for the millennial lefties. And I say this because only as I've gotten older, as opposed to the old adage that you get more conservative, I have only gotten more left. And the reason I have only gotten more left, and the reason that I think the Democratic Party is so hungry to repeat that, oh, no, it's not about his message, it's not about what he said, it's about the fact that he was better on social media. The reason they need you to believe that, and the reason they want you, they need to believe that, is because they don't want to provide you with material goods. They are perfectly fine creating a committee that will look into the possibility of studying a process that could potentially get you down the line. Then you're dead. And then you're dead. That is what we as millennials have experienced our entire life. We saw it the very first time, not the very first time, but we saw it, all through the 90s as Bill Clinton came in and basically ran as, a Reagan diet. We saw it at the end of the 90s as they caved and did not demand that Al Gore become the president. And can you imagine the world we live in right now? Can you imagine how the 2000s would be if we had started with Al Gore as president as opposed to George W. Bush as president? We wouldn't have Dick Cheney. Go to hell. And enjoy your time there. That has been our entire life experience. That is the truth that we have had. And we were born into a world that told us constantly, oh, this is the way things happen in America, and this is what makes us the strongest place to be. And then we look at what we're going through. We look at the internet bubble bursting. We look at the housing bubble bursting. We look at Occupy Wall Street happening, and just one time where a small group of people make demands that we be more equitable with our wealth, and how that was treated. Although I will say it's so nice to see that a democratic socialist becomes mayor of New York only 13 years after that. Bravo. We have experienced the lie, and we won't be lied to anymore. Also, we have the internet. We know there are places like France, which has had a socialist mayor for I think like 8 years now. Shout out to Anne Hidalgo. Doing great things. I was there a couple years ago. Bike lanes, magnificent, fantastic. If you're like me and you find yourself going slowly, ever more insane, just know that it's because you know what a lie sounds like. And the Democrats are lying to us. At this point, I am a democratic socialist now. It's not hard to say, particularly as, I am a person of the world who understands that socialism has existed all through Europe for like 50-ish years, since World War II. Prior to that, actually, it's been a valid party that has caused no problems. You know what's happened while they've had it? They've had socialized healthcare. They've had really good schools. They've had basically free college for a long time. It's getting a little more expensive over there, but if you saw what it costs now compared to what it costs here to go to college, you would pay it in a heartbeat. They need you to believe that lie, because once you don't, they are useless to you. And that's why they are so terrified of all of us paying attention to Zohran, and they keep trying to be like, no, the future of the party is Spanberg, a CIA operative that no one outside of Virginia was talking about before this current week. I'm sorry. We've been talking about Zohran for fucking 6 months now, at least. They need you to be interested in it, because that is how they continue the lie. And that allows them to not do a damn thing for you. Now, are we going to have to show up for Zohran? And if you live in New York, and actually if you are anywhere, yes, we are going to have to show up. We are going to have to do the work. But honestly, they have been telling us that we didn't have to do anything so long so that they could not do anything. It's the actual promises and the willingness to do something. It's not the social media.